Couple questions. Folks want to know how I go about, or what's the right way to adjust wooden planes. And if you've never used a wooden plane before, this can be a pretty common question. One of the first things you may notice when you buy an old wooden plane, in a lot of cases, you may find on the toe of the plane up here or on the heel of the plane, there'll be a lot of dents and dings from what appear to be hammer blows. And typically that's exactly what they're from folks trying to use something like this or some other kind of steel hammer to adjust their wooden planes. So point number one, steel hammers are a no-no, in case you haven't figured it out. That's what causes mushrooming of plane irons. You'll commonly find that the top of the iron will be all mushroomed over and deformed, and it also dents and dings up the back or the toe of the plane stock. So you want to avoid using a steel hammer. Ultimately, you want something that is about the same density or less dense or softer than the plane stock itself. Some folks will just use a regular carving mallet or their regular mallet. I've used a small wooden plane adjusting hammer that I purposely made for that task, and I've used this for a number of years. The only downside, I think, to this type of hammer is that it can be a little bit difficult on a plane like this when you want to make a lateral adjustment to get good registration without hitting, the side of the plane stock or the side of the wedge, just because of the size of the head of this particular hammer. So recently I made another smaller version. This one is made out of brass and walnut. Half of the hammer is made out just from a piece of brass rod, and on the other end is just a small walnut head that I can use for wood-to-wood contact. So let's use this hammer to talk about how we're going to adjust a wooden plane. Some wooden planes you'll see will just be simple plain stock like this. What you would do in this case, so in order to remove the iron, you can tap the side of the wedge to loosen it up just a little bit. But typically what you're going to do is you're going to wrap the heel or back of the plane, and that's going to loosen that wedge in the iron for you. And it's a good idea to keep a finger or two underneath the iron, especially in the case of a single iron plane, because once you wrap that plane and loosen that wedge, in a single iron plane, that wedge can just fall right out of the mouth of the plane, hit the floor, hit your toe, whatever. When you have a plane with a cap iron, usually the cap iron will prevent it from sliding all the way through. But with a single iron plane, molding planes, rabbet planes, any type of joinery plane or single iron bench planes, there's nothing to stop that plane iron from falling straight through to the floor. So good idea, just good practice to kind of put your fingers under there just to make sure the iron doesn't fall out. Now, once you seat your plane, your iron, in this case I'm going to use the wood side of the mallet just to give the wedge a tap to lock everything in place, make sure it's not going to fall out. Now right now I don't have any iron projection, so there are two things that I can do to extend the blade or make the plane cut deeper. I can use my hammer and tap the back of the iron, and it doesn't take a lot, they're very light taps. Or I can also use the wooden side and tap the toe of the plane. Both of those actions will make the iron cut deeper. If I want to back the iron off, again, I want to tap the heel of the plane, and that will make the iron cut less deep. Now anytime you tap the back of the plane, you're going to want to reseat the wedge. And that's a good habit to get into when you make the plane cut, even when you make it cut deeper, reseat the wedge. You can also, to back the iron off, tap the top of the toe. Okay, so the front of the toe to make it cut deeper. The top of the toe will back it off. It's just the same as hitting the back of the heel will. Some planes you might see will have a strike button like this. This particular plane has a button that is set into the toe of the plane, and the purpose of that is to give you a place to strike with your adjusting hammer. So you can tap that strike button to back the iron out or loosen the wedge and iron without damaging the rest of the plane. And if the strike button gets damaged, you can always just remove the strike button and replace it. But again, this plane is adjusted very similarly to the smooth plane without the strike button. You can tap the button itself or the toe of the plane to retract the iron, or you can tap the heel. And to make the iron cut deeper, you can tap the front or you can tap the back of the iron. To make lateral adjustments, you would just use the brass face in this case, and I'm going to tap the sides of the iron opposite of the one that I want to cut deeper. So if I'm cutting too deep on the left and I want to cut deeper on the right, I'll tap the left side of the blade. That will shift it over and make it cut deeper on the right hand side. Similarly, if I wanted to cut deeper on the left, I'll tap the right hand side of the blade as you're looking at it from the back. And again, always reseat your wedge anytime you make an adjustment. The last type that I want to talk about is the finial type wedge. You'll find these on joinery planes, on molding planes, and other side escapement type planes. This type of wedge, you may find it tempting to loosen a really stuck wedge to hit this finial here. And while that will most of the time work, it's also a very good way to break the finial off the wedge. If you've seen any used planes on the market where this finial has broken off, it's because somebody has been hitting it with a hammer trying to hit the wedge to back it out. Really, you want to avoid hitting the finial with your mallet, because that's basically what's going to happen. Is at some point you're just going to, there's a lot of short grain in here and you're just going to break that finial off the wedge. So you adjust this no different than you would adjust one of your top escapement bench planes. Tap the toe to make it cut deeper, or tap the back of the iron. And to retract the blade or loosen the wedge, you can tap the top of the toe or the heel. I personally prefer to tap the heel to back the blade out. I don't like tapping the toe. It's just a personal preference. There's really no right or wrong. I just prefer to tap the heel of the plane to retract the iron or loosen the wedge. And I prefer to tap the back of the blade to advance rather than the toe of the plane. I just feel like I have more control that way. But again, the top of the toe or the heel to loosen the wedge or retract the iron, or the front of the toe or the back of the iron to extend it, and always reseat the wedge after.